"Daddy, she sleeps in her car." The black CEO turned around and followed the nanny home. Julian Vance lived in a world of glass and silence. His penthouse, perched atop the city like a modern-day Olympus, was a testament to a life meticulously constructed from steel, ambition, and an unforgiving work ethic. Every surface gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting. Every piece of furniture was a statement of minimalist wealth. Yet, the quiet that filled the vast, open spaces was not peaceful. It was a hollow, echoing thing, a constant reminder of what was missing. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, a tumbler of amber liquid held loosely in his hand. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of a million lives, a million stories he could not touch. He saw none of it. His gaze was fixed on a single, silver-framed photograph on the marble mantelpiece. A woman with a smile that could outshine the sun, her arm around a much younger Julian, his own smile so wide and unburdened it looked like it belonged to a stranger. It was a photograph from before the silence, before the glass walls had become a fortress against feeling. He took a slow sip. The liquor did nothing to warm the persistent chill that had settled deep in his bones years ago. It was a cold that no thermostat could vanquish, a frost that had crept into his heart on the day he lost her. Now, his world was orderly, predictable, and empty. His company, Vance Industries, was a titan of innovation. His name commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe. But here, in the quiet of his home, he was just a man haunted by the ghost of laughter. And he was a father. That, above all, was the role that terrified him the most. Miles away, in a world made of cold steel and condensation, Elara Mason shivered. Her world was not a penthouse, but a 10-year-old sedan parked in the forgotten corner of a 24-hour supermarket lot. The thin blanket she had pulled up to her chin offered little defense against the November wind that cut like a blade through the car's worn seals. The quiet here was different from Julian's. It was a heavy, pressing silence, thick with the scent of stale coffee and the metallic tang of fear. Her breath plumed in the frigid air. She stared at the fogged-up windshield, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cold glass. Tucked into the sun visor was her own photograph, a creased, wallet-sized picture of her parents, their faces beaming, standing in front of the small bakery they had run their whole lives. The bakery that was gone. The home that was gone. Everything that had once felt solid and certain had been swept away by a tide of medical bills and bad luck, leaving her adrift in this cold, lonely sea. She clutched a stack of resumes on the passenger seat, the paper stiff and cold. Each one felt like a prayer sent out into the void. She was a professional. She was good at her job. For years, she had been one of the most sought-after nannies in her previous city, known for her patience and her almost magical ability to connect with children. But starting over in a new city with no references and no address was like trying to climb a sheer wall of ice. All she had was this car, a dwindling supply of courage, and the quiet dignity that was her last, most precious possession. The call had come from a temp agency late that afternoon. A last-minute, one-evening job. A chief executive officer needed someone to watch his daughter. The address was in the wealthiest part of the city, a place that felt like another planet. The pay was more than she had seen in a month. It was a lifeline. She had used the last of her money for a day pass at a local gym to shower and press her one good blouse. She had to look the part. She had to be flawless. When she arrived, the sheer scale of the building was dizzying. A doorman who looked like he could bench press her car announced her arrival. The private elevator ascended in unnerving silence, opening directly into the cavernous living room where Julian Vance waited. He was taller than she expected, his presence filling the space more completely than any of the expensive art on the walls. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, but shadowed by a weariness that she recognized instantly. It was the same exhaustion she saw in her own reflection. "Miss Mason," he said, his voice a low baritone that held no warmth. "My daughter, Lily. Her regular nanny had a family emergency." He gestured toward a small girl with wide, curious eyes and two pigtails that seemed to have a life of their own. She was hiding halfway behind a sleek, white sofa. Elara's professional instincts took over, pushing her own anxieties into a small, locked box in the back of her mind. She knelt, bringing herself down to the child's level. She didn't crowd her. She just waited, a soft, patient smile on her face. "Hello, Lily. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Alara." Lily peeked out, her gaze serious. After a long moment, she stepped forward. "You have kind eyes," the little girl declared, with the unfiltered honesty of a 6-year-old. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, crossed Julian's face before it was gone. He gave Alara a curt list of instructions, his tone all business. Bedtime was at 8. There was food in the refrigerator. He would be late. He didn't ask her any questions about herself. To him, she was a function, a temporary solution to a logistical problem. He was gone before she could ask anything in return. The silence he left behind was quickly filled by Lily's bright chatter. The little girl was a whirlwind of energy and questions. She showed Alara her room, a pastel wonderland of toys and books. She showed her Barnaby, a stuffed bear with one button eye and a slightly crooked ear. "He's my best friend," Lily explained. "Mommy gave him to me." Alara felt a gentle pang in her chest. She picked up the bear, her fingers tracing the loose thread where his ear was attached. "He looks very well loved," she said softly. She noticed a small, portable sewing kit in an open craft box on Lily's desk. "Would you like me to see if I can make his ear a little stronger?" Lily's eyes widened. "You can do that." With careful, practiced stitches, Alara secured the bear's ear. It was a small thing, a simple act of mending. But as she worked, with Lily watching in rapt attention, the vast, cold apartment began to feel a little warmer. They read stories, built a tower of blocks that reached almost to the ceiling, and ate macaroni and cheese at the huge dining table that could have seated 20. As bedtime approached, Lily grew quiet. She held Barnaby tight. "Do you have to go home soon?" she asked, her voice small. "When your daddy gets back, yes," Alara said, tucking the blankets around her. "Can you stay?" "I wish I could." "Sweet girl," Alara smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "But I have to go to my own home." The words felt like a lie, sharp and bitter on her tongue. Her home was a cold car in a parking lot. Julian returned long after midnight. The apartment was silent again. He found Alara sitting in a chair in the living room, reading a book under a single lamp. She stood as he entered, her posture perfectly professional. "She went to sleep without any trouble," Alara reported softly. "She's a wonderful child, Mr. Vance." "Thank you." He pulled out his wallet, his movements stiff. He paid her the agreed-upon amount, adding a generous tip. There was an awkward pause. He felt an unfamiliar urge to say something more, to ask her if she'd be available again, but the habit of solitude was too strong. He simply nodded. "I'll have my assistant call the agency if we need you again." "Good night, Mr. Vance." She turned and walked to the elevator, her back straight, her dignity a shield around her. The doors closed, and he was alone again in the silence. He walked into Lily's room and saw her sleeping peacefully, clutching the bear with the newly mended ear. He touched the neat, almost invisible stitches. A strange feeling, one he couldn't name, stirred within him. It was a flicker of warmth in the endless cold. The next morning, Lily was unusually quiet at breakfast. She pushed her cereal around the bowl, her brow furrowed in concentration. Julian, scrolling through market reports on his tablet, barely noticed at first. "Daddy?" she finally said. "Yes, sweetie," he replied, his eyes still on the screen. "Alara doesn't have a home." Julian looked up. "What are you talking about?" "Of course she has a home." Lily shook her head, her pigtails bouncing. "No, I saw. When she was getting her coat, her bag fell over. There was a pillow in it, and a toothbrush, and a blanket. Like when we go camping." She paused, her eyes wide and serious. "Daddy, she sleeps in her car." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Julian felt a jolt, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He wanted to dismiss it. A child's imagination. A misunderstanding. But Lily's gaze was unwavering, filled with a certainty that unsettled him. He thought of Alara's quiet composure, the worn collar of her coat, the way she had accepted his payment without a word, her eyes betraying nothing. "I see," he said slowly, putting his tablet down. The market reports suddenly seemed trivial. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw in her concerned face a reflection of his late wife's empathy. It was a quality he feared he had lost himself. That evening, he called the agency and requested Alara again, citing a last-minute dinner meeting. It was a lie. There was no meeting. There was only a cold, heavy knot of curiosity and something else, something that felt dangerously like concern, in his chest. Alara was just as professional, just as gentle with Lily as she had been before. She betrayed no sign of hardship. She laughed and played, her focus entirely on his daughter. But Julian watched her now with different eyes. He saw the faint shadows of fatigue under her makeup. He saw the way she ate the dinner she prepared for Lily, slowly, as if savoring every bite. He saw the quiet dignity that he now understood was a form of armor. He left the apartment at his usual time, but instead of going to his office, he drove his car to a discreet spot down the block with a clear view of the building's entrance. He waited. The hours crawled by. The city lights blurred. He felt like a fool, a spy in his own life. What was he even doing? Just after 10, he saw her. Alara walked out of the building, pulling her thin coat tight against the wind. She didn't head for the subway or a bus stop. She walked 2 blocks to a public parking garage, her steps purposeful. Julian started his car, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm, and followed at a distance. She drove her old sedan out of the city center, heading toward the industrial outskirts. She pulled into the same supermarket parking lot he had seen from news reports about the city's hidden homeless population. She found a spot at the far edge of the lot, under the weak orange glow of a security light, and cut the engine. Julian parked across the street, his own powerful engine a silent hum. He watched as her silhouette moved inside the car. She reclined the driver's seat. She pulled a blanket from the back. She settled in for the night. The sight was a physical blow. Lily was right. It wasn't a child's fantasy. It was the cold, hard truth. A woman who had filled his home with warmth and tenderness for a few hours was now trying to sleep in a freezing car. The glass walls of his penthouse seemed to materialize around him, and for the first time, he felt utterly trapped by his own life. He picked up his phone, his fingers unsteady. He dialed his assistant, Marcus. "Marcus," he said, his voice strained. "I have a job for you. It's personal, and it requires absolute discretion." He gave him Alara's name. "I want to know everything about her. Where she came from. What happened to her. Everything. And I want it on my desk by morning." The next day, a sleek, digital file was waiting in his inbox. Julian opened it with a sense of dread. The story it told was one of quiet tragedy. Alara Mason, a top-rated nanny from a neighboring state. Her parents, owners of a beloved local bakery, had both fallen ill within months of each other. Alara had quit her job to care for them, draining her savings to pay for treatments that ultimately failed. After they passed, the inherited debt from the business and medical bills was overwhelming. A fire in her apartment building, ruled accidental, had taken the last of her possessions. With nothing left, she had come to this city, hoping for a fresh start. There was no hint of scandal, no poor choices, no addiction. There was only a cascade of heartbreaking misfortune, met with a resilience that humbled him. She had never filed for bankruptcy. She had never applied for public assistance. She was trying to climb out of the abyss on her own, armed with nothing but her own integrity. He looked at the attached photo, a driver's license picture. The same kind eyes Lily had noticed. He closed the file, the silence of his office pressing in on him. He had built an empire on calculated risks and strategic decisions. He had solved complex problems with logic and resources. But this was different. This was a person, a life. He requested Alara for the rest of the week. When she arrived that afternoon, he made a point to be there. He didn't mention the car or the investigation. He simply tried to have a real conversation. "Lily really enjoys the time you spend with her," he began, his voice softer than usual. Alara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up her face. "She's a joy, Mr. Vance. Bright and so full of life. Please, call me Julian." The words felt foreign. He hadn't asked anyone to use his first name in years. She looked surprised, but nodded. "Alara." He gestured to the sofa. "Can you sit for a moment?" Before Lily finishes her homework, he needed to understand the woman behind the report. He asked her about where she was from, a simple, non-threatening question. She spoke of her small town, of the bakery that smelled of cinnamon and her father's laughter, of her mother who could make any flower grow. She spoke of the past with a gentle nostalgia that held no trace of self-pity. As she talked, Julian saw not a victim, but a woman of immense strength, a woman who had loved and lost, just as he had. He saw a flicker of the same light he had lost in his own life, the light of his late wife, Caroline. It wasn't that they were alike in personality, but they shared a core of kindness, a quiet fortitude that felt both familiar and incredibly rare. A connection, fragile as a thread of silk, began to form between them in the quiet of that vast room. He knew he had to do something, but he also knew that a direct offer of help would wound her pride, the very thing that was keeping her going. It had to be subtle. It had to be from a distance. He started with small things. He instructed Marcus to call the temp agency and book Alara for every single day, indefinitely, at a significantly higher rate, with the increase disguised as a new premium client fee from the agency itself. Then, he arranged for a random promotional giveaway from a local auto shop. One afternoon, as Alara was leaving, a man in a mechanic's uniform approached her in the parking garage. He told her she'd won a free full-service package, including 4 new tires and a tune-up. She was suspicious, but the offer was too good to refuse. While her car was being serviced, the shop, on Marcus's quiet instruction, also fixed a faulty heater she hadn't been able to afford to repair. The next morning, for the first time in months, Alara drove to work in a car that was warm. Tears pricked her eyes as the hot air washed over her cold hands. She didn't know where this miracle had come from, but it felt like the universe was finally giving her a sliver of grace. Julian watched the changes in her. The shadows under her eyes began to fade. She had a little more color in her cheeks. The constant, low-level tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. He found himself making excuses to come home from work earlier, just to catch the last half hour of her time with Lily, to hear the sound of their laughter echoing in the halls. The silence in his home was receding, replaced by something warm and alive. The fragile new balance was shattered on a Tuesday. Julian was in a high-stakes negotiation across town when his phone buzzed with a frantic call from Alara. Her voice was tight, with controlled panic. "Julian, it's Lily. She's having trouble breathing. Her inhaler isn't working. I'm on my way to the nearest hospital." A cold dread washed over Julian, instantly eclipsing the multi-million-dollar deal on the table. He was out of the room in seconds, barking apologies as he ran. "I'm on my way." "Which hospital?" By the time he arrived, his heart pounding against his ribs, he found Alara at the emergency room reception desk, locked in a quiet but firm argument with a dismissive administrator. Lily was on her lap, wheezing, her small face pale. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without the primary insurance holder's information or pre-authorization, you'll have to wait," the administrator said, not even looking up from her computer screen. "She is a child and she can't breathe," Alara said, her voice dangerously low. "Her father is on his way. You need to get her seen by a doctor now." "Everyone here needs to be seen by a doctor," the woman replied with a sigh. "Please take a seat." That's when Julian swept in, his presence a storm of controlled fury. "She is my daughter," he announced, his voice booming through the waiting room. Everyone turned to look. He placed a protective hand on Alara's shoulder. "And this woman is with me. My daughter will be seen now, or I will buy this hospital and turn it into a parking lot. Do you understand me?" The administrator's eyes widened in shock and recognition. Suddenly, a team of nurses was there, whisking Lily into a treatment room. Julian never let go of Alara's shoulder. In that moment, in the sterile, chaotic glare of the emergency room, the distance between them collapsed. He was no longer just her employer, and she was no longer just a temporary nanny. He was a terrified father, and she was the calm, fierce protector of his child. They were a team. Lily was diagnosed with a severe asthma attack, triggered by a sudden cold virus. She was stabilized and would be fine, but they had to keep her overnight for observation. In the quiet of the private room Julian had demanded, with Lily sleeping peacefully between them, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving a raw, shared vulnerability in its wake. "Thank you, Alara," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were incredible. You saved her." She shook her head, her gaze fixed on the sleeping child. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," he said, looking at her, really seeing the strength that radiated from her. "Not everyone. You were calm. You were in control." He took a deep breath. "I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" she asked, confused. "This arrangement. This pretense." He finally looked her in the eye. "Alara, I know you've been living in your car." Her face went pale. The composure she wore like armor cracked, and for a second, he saw the raw hurt and humiliation beneath. She looked away, her jaw tight. I see. No, you don't, he said quickly, his heart aching at the pain he had caused. I'm not saying it out of pity. I'm saying it because I am in awe of you. The dignity you've maintained, the care you've shown my daughter. It's humbling. He leaned forward, his voice earnest. I want to offer you a permanent position. As Lily's governess. Live in. A proper salary, benefits, your own suite of rooms in the penthouse. Please, Alara, let us help you. Let us be your safe place to land. The offer was everything she had been dreaming of for months. Stability, security, a home. But hearing it laid out so plainly, in the wake of her most vulnerable secret being exposed, felt like a brand. It felt like charity. The pride that had been her shield for so long rose up, fierce and protective. She was a professional, not a project. She took a shaky breath and squared her shoulders. Thank you, Julian. That's an incredibly generous offer. I accept the position as Lily's governess. But I can't live with you. I will find my own apartment. Julian was stunned into silence. He had offered her a kingdom, and she had accepted only a small cottage on the outskirts. He couldn't understand. But why? It makes no sense. Everything would be easier. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I can't be a project, Julian. I won't be. The withdrawal was immediate. Over the next few days, a polite but distinct wall went up between them. She was impeccably professional, warm and loving with Lily, but cool and distant with him. The easy camaraderie they had started to build was gone, replaced by the formal titles of Mr. Vance and Miss Mason. The warmth in the penthouse began to recede again, and the silence started to creep back in from the corners of the vast rooms. Julian was lost. He had tried to help, to solve the problem with resources and logic, the only way he knew how. He had failed. He had offered her a rescue when what she needed was to be seen as an equal. He realized with a painful lurch that his gesture, however well-intentioned, had reinforced the very power imbalance she was fighting so hard to overcome. He had made her feel small. He spent days in a fog of frustration and regret. He watched her from a distance, saw her poring over apartment listings in her spare moments, saw the determination in her eyes. He knew if he let her walk out that door into her own small apartment, the fragile connection between them would sever completely. She would be an employee, and the chance for anything more, the chance to heal the suffocating loneliness in his own life, would be gone. He had to show her. He couldn't just tell her. He had to show her that he saw her, the strong, capable, kind-hearted woman, not her circumstances. He called Marcus. That file on Alara, he said. There was a mention of a place she used to volunteer. A community center. Tell me about it. Marcus's research was swift. The Northwood Community Center, in the neighborhood where Alara had grown up. It had been her passion project, a safe haven for local kids. She had run an after-school arts program there. But since she'd left, and after city budget cuts, the center had fallen into disrepair. The roof leaked, the paint was peeling, and most of its programs had been shut down. It was a shadow of its former self. Julian found his answer. He funneled a massive, anonymous donation through his company's foundation to a local construction firm. The instructions were clear: a complete, top-to-bottom renovation of the Northwood Community Center. New roof, new windows, new floors, a fully restocked art room, a small library, even a new playground outside. And it had to be done in 2 weeks. It was a flurry of quiet activity. While Alara was at the penthouse with Lily, an army of workers descended on the forgotten building. Julian oversaw the project from afar, obsessing over every detail. He wanted it to be exactly as he imagined she would want it. Bright colors, lots of light, shelves filled not just with new books, but with the classics she had mentioned she loved as a child. 2 weeks later, it was done. The day Alara was scheduled to sign the lease on a tiny studio apartment across town, Julian intercepted her. Before you go, he said, his voice tight with nerves. There's somewhere I need to take you. Please, just an hour. She was hesitant, but she saw something in his eyes, a raw, desperate plea, that made her agree. They drove in silence, not toward the sterile high-rises of downtown, but back toward the old, familiar streets of the neighborhood she had once called home. When he pulled up in front of the Northwood Community Center, she gasped. It was transformed. The dilapidated building was now a beacon of light and color. The broken fence was gone, replaced by a new one enclosing a playground where children were laughing and shouting. Fresh paint gleamed in the afternoon sun. A banner above the door read, "Grand Reopening." "What is this?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Come see," he said softly, leading her inside. The interior was even more stunning. The leaky ceilings were repaired, the floors shone, and the walls were covered in bright murals. In the corner was the art room, stocked to the brim with paints, clay, and paper. Children were already inside, happily making a mess under the watchful eye of a new director. Alara walked through the rooms as if in a dream, her hand trailing along the freshly painted walls. She stopped in front of the new library, her eyes scanning the titles. She saw all her childhood favorites. Tears began to well in her eyes. She turned to him, her expression a mixture of confusion and overwhelming emotion. "You did this." He nodded, his heart in his throat. "My foundation made an anonymous donation. There's no plaque with my name on it. No one knows where the money came from." He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "This isn't charity, Alara. This is you. This is what you do. You build things. You nurture them. You create warmth and safety where there was none. I just provided the tools." He reached out, his hand hovering just above her arm. "I don't want to be your rescuer. I want to be your partner. I'm not offering you a safe place to land because you're weak. I'm offering it because you are the strongest person I have ever met, and you have reminded me what it feels like to have a home. The penthouse was just a building until you and Lily filled it with laughter. I need that. Lily needs that. We need you." The dam broke. The tears she had held back for so long finally fell, silent tears of profound, soul-deep relief. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. He saw her. He truly saw her. The strength, the spirit, the woman she was, not the situation she was in. All the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart crumbled into dust. "Yes," she whispered, the word catching in her throat, thick with emotion. She looked up at him, her kind eyes shining through her tears. "Yes, Julian. Yes." He finally closed the distance between them, gently wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. It was a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. Not fear, not defeat, but hope. A quiet, shimmering hope that filled the space between them and promised a new beginning. Alara moved in the next day, not into a guest suite, but into the room adjoining Lily's, a space they redesigned together, painting the walls a soft, sunny yellow. The change in the penthouse was immediate and profound. The vast, silent spaces were now filled with the scent of baking cookies, the sound of music, and the constant, happy chatter of a little girl who finally had her world made whole. A new, gentle rhythm established itself. They ate breakfast together every morning at the huge table, which no longer felt imposing, but communal. Julian started leaving work at 5 o'clock, a feat his entire company thought was impossible. He came home not to an empty apartment, but to the sight of Alara and Lily curled up on the sofa, reading a story or working together on a messy, wonderful art project. He watched her, amazed at how effortlessly she had transformed his glass fortress into a home. She brought in plants that softened the sharp, modern lines. She hung Lily's paintings on the refrigerator with bright, silly magnets. She convinced him to have a family movie night every Friday, complete with popcorn and blankets on the floor. She was slowly, patiently, thawing the frost that had encased his heart for years. For Alara, it was like learning to breathe again. The constant, grinding anxiety that had been her companion for so long finally loosened its grip. She had a home. She had a purpose. More than that, she had a family. She found herself falling not just for the bright, loving little girl who adored her, but for the quiet, serious man who looked at her with such reverence and gentle care. She saw past the CEO and saw the lonely father, the grieving husband, the good man who had forgotten how to let joy into his life. Months melted into a season of quiet healing. They were a unit, moving through the world together. They went to the park, to museums, to the newly thriving community center where Alara had started volunteering again, this time with Julian and Lily helping alongside her. 6 months after she had moved in, Julian's company hosted its annual foundation gala. It was a glittering affair, attended by the city's elite. Alara was nervous, the expensive gown Julian had insisted on buying for her feeling like a costume. But as she stood by his side, With Lily holding both of their hands, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. Julian went to the stage to give the keynote address. He spoke eloquently about his foundation's mission, about giving back to the community. But then he went off script. His eyes found Alara in the crowd. Success, I've learned. He began, his voice growing softer, more personal, is not measured in stock prices or market share. It's measured in warmth, in laughter. It's measured in the moments that make a silent house feel like a home. He stepped away from the podium, to the surprise of the audience. He walked directly through the crowd, his path unwavering, until he was standing in front of her. The entire ballroom fell silent. He knelt, taking her hand in his. He wasn't just holding a microphone. He was holding out his heart for the whole world to see. Alara Mason, you came into my life and you filled it with light. You mended more than just a stuffed bear's ear. You mended a broken family. You taught me how to live again. From his pocket, he pulled out not one object, but two. The first was a simple, elegant diamond ring that caught the light of the chandeliers shaped like frozen stars. The second was a single, old-fashioned brass key. This key, he said, his voice thick with emotion, is to the first small house I ever bought, long before all of this. I kept it because it reminded me of what was real. But it was never a home. You are my home, Alara. He looked up at her, his eyes shining. Will you make it ours forever? Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Alara's face as she nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally managed to whisper. Lily squealed with delight and threw her arms around both of them, a tiny, perfect link in their new family chain. The ballroom erupted in applause, a wave of sound that was full of warmth and celebration. A year later, they weren't married in a grand cathedral or a lavish ballroom. They chose the garden of the Northwood Community Center, the place that symbolized their true beginning. It was a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by blooming flowers and the sound of children playing nearby. Lily, as the flower girl, walked proudly down the aisle, tossing petals with joyous abandon. Alara, in a simple white dress, looked radiant, her eyes fixed on Julian. And Julian, standing under a canopy of oak trees, looked at his bride and his daughter, and the smile on his face was the same wide, unburdened one from the photograph on his mantelpiece. The stranger was gone. He was home. He had come from a world of glass and silence, and she from a world of cold and fear. They had been two isolated souls, adrift in their own private grief. But a child's innocent words, a single act of quiet kindness, had created a bridge between their two worlds. Together, under the warm afternoon sun, they were no longer the wounded leader and the downtrodden giver. They were simply a family, whole and healed, their future as bright and promising as the endless summer sky. And so, a story that began in the cold and the dark found its ending in the warmth and the light. It serves as a beautiful reminder that the greatest changes in our lives often begin with the smallest acts of compassion. A mended toy, a shared meal, a moment of seeing the humanity in another person can be enough to heal the deepest wounds and build a future filled with love. The greatest treasures we can find are not in wealth or power, but in the connections we forge and the family we choose. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, please take a moment to show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who might need a little hope, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more content that uplifts and inspires. Your engagement helps us continue to create stories that celebrate the best of the human spirit. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.